Hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, The Cloud is Here, Why Aren't You? In this session, we'll make the case for the cloud in government. My name is Petra Dennison, Marketing Manager at AKA Enterprise Solutions, and I'll be moderating the presentation. Before we get started, I wanted to run through a couple of housekeeping notes. To optimize the viewing quality of the presentation, please close any programs you have running besides GoToWebinar. If you experience any visual or audio issues, please contact GoTo directly at care.citrixonline.com/GoToWebinar/contact us. Also, I wanted to point out the questions pane at the control panel in the upper right corner of your screen. Using this functionality, you may submit questions at any time during the presentation, and we will address as many as possible during the Q&A session at the end of today's webinar. If we don't get to your question, we will follow up after the presentation. The webinar is being recorded, and a link to the recording will be sent to you within the next few business days. Today's session is being presented by Greg Inks, Cloud Practice Lead at AK Enterprise Solutions. Greg is a cloud technology expert committed to the development and growth of AK's cloud practice and technology direction. Now I'd like to hand it over to him. Greg?
Thanks, Petra. Very much appreciated. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today for today's webinar on Azure Government Cloud and what we can do with Azure Government Cloud to help you with your journey in the cloud. Today's agenda is going to start off with a little bit of a brief overview of what is Azure, specifically talking about the Azure Government Cloud, but also cloud technologies in general, just to set the stage for some common terms and methodologies that you should be aware of as you start to discuss the cloud or your options in moving into there. The second area that we'll spend a little bit of time is talking about why no two clouds are created equal, specifically things that you should consider when evaluating both public cloud providers, private cloud providers, or alternative hosting options. We'll spend a little bit of time talking through security and compliance, specifically around what Microsoft and Azure has for you as a government customer and things that you should be aware of in terms of security and compliance and some of the advantages that exist because of the Azure Government Cloud. We'll talk a little bit about the costs and the value propositions of using the Azure Government Cloud and what you can take advantage of to help you fulfill your needs, both for your employee base as well as your citizens. And then lastly, we'll spend a little bit of time covering off on other case studies and examples of technology that people are using in Azure Government Cloud, give you some idea of use cases that both AKA has implemented as well as other projects that Microsoft has taken on directly. And then we'll save a little bit of time for question and answer at the end. So let's just get into it. First, what is Azure and what is the Azure Government Cloud? Well, from a definition perspective, Azure has a bunch of different meanings. The word Azure itself is actually an adjective. I had to look this up on Wikipedia myself. And it really means the color blue. There's a running joke inside of Microsoft circles that Microsoft picked the word Azure because blue happens to be in their color palette, and they wanted to form a foundation of a marketing strategy. I don't know if that's true, but it's interesting nonetheless. It also means a small butterfly. I don't know that I think of butterflies when I'm thinking about the cloud, but interesting to see some of the alternative definitions that are out there. But if you were actually to talk to Microsoft and others in the IT circles about what is Azure, their definition is specifically a growing collection of internet cloud services that can be used by developers, engineers, and professionals to basically build solutions for you, both through applications, through infrastructure, security, you name it. But it's a set of cloud services that you can take advantage of. So said very simply, they can be cloud services like infrastructure hosted in the public cloud through virtualization techniques, or it could be more fine-grained services like internet search and providing you with an ability to have an on-premise feel or an on-property feel of a search engine running inside of one of your applications but hosted and operated in the cloud, or potentially something like a security vault where you can store secrets and passwords, applications, and credentials inside of a secured vault built and accessed by your applications. So it's a set of cloud services. At last count, Microsoft has over 500 of these cloud services that you can take advantage of when trying to create applications or landscapes for usage. It also provides software as a service, platform as a service, and infrastructure as a service. These are very common terms that we'll go through and explain in a little bit greater depth here in a few minutes, but these are words that you'll hear from any public cloud provider. And it's specifically different types of technology that support programming languages, tools, frameworks, both open source as well as Microsoft proprietary, that will allow you to build just about anything that you want to on the cloud as a first-class citizen. And finally, with Azure, you really have the full control to be able to build whatever it is that you want to without having to fret or worry about the underlying technology or infrastructure that happens to be in place to support this. Or said differently, infrastructure is not really your primary area of responsibility when you take advantage of the cloud. Take a look at Microsoft from a cloud perspective and say, where is it? Azure is really just about everywhere that we do business in these days. You can see a very large concentration in North America. They're starting to get some concentrations in South America, Europe, Asia, what have you. Azure is currently in 40 different regions throughout the world, with content delivery networks and accelerated backbones in multiple locations that really can span across the globe quite significantly. The investment that Microsoft is making in the cloud in particular is quite substantial, in that they are the most rapid deployed set of data centers in any of the public cloud providers. Some would even say 2 times that of AWS as an example on the statistic that came from Microsoft. But really, Microsoft is making a tremendous investment here. So much so that they're even pioneering innovation with the way that they develop their data centers. They're very focused on green initiatives and developing solutions to power these data centers in such a way that it doesn't detract from environmental concerns. Rumor has it that there's even some research on whether or not a data center could be developed and put underwater at the bottom of the ocean to take advantage of tidal currents to help cool and power the data center. So some interesting innovations that are being used just in the help of developing the public cloud. Now, to get into those terms that you saw me mention at the very beginning, these are things that you'll often hear in IT circles in particular, but also even in CTO and CIO circles. Infrastructure as a service, or IaaS, platform as a service, or PaaS, and software as a service, or SaaS. What are these and what should you know about? Well, infrastructure as a service is really just virtualized hardware that you can assemble to go build your applications, your landscapes, your environment, and really take things out of hardware that you own and maintain on premise and put it up into the cloud where Microsoft has tools, accelerators, and methodologies that help control that for you on your behalf. You are responsible for the design and maintenance of this infrastructure. So rather than actually having a physical piece of hardware sitting in your data center that you go and touch on a regular basis, there's still a piece of hardware somewhere else in the public cloud that's hosting. You have to take care of your operating system, your virus protection, your threat management, your identity and control, and really all the applications that are running out of it. The big difference here is that the infrastructure is just not something you get to touch. You get to touch the virtualized machine that's running up there. It can support any x86 architecture, which is basically modern day server technology. The only real technology out there that can't be supported by infrastructure as a service would be that of, say, mainframe technology, which is not an x86 platform. At last check, I don't know if mainframes are supported by any of the cloud providers, but you never know, things are changing on a fairly rapid basis. You also have to build it from scratch. So there are some accelerated operating system disks that you can select from when you deploy a server into Azure, but really you're building things from the ground up. So much like your IT department would go and rack and stack a piece of hardware and then lay down an operating system on top of it, you're pretty much starting from that kind of a base level when you start to use infrastructure as a service. If you kind of put it into an analogy, you can think of it as sort of like somebody who comes up with the idea that I want to have a sports field. I may not necessarily know what type of sports I want to play, but I know that I want to have a sports field. So you got to select your land, you got to go and cultivate that land, flatten it out, do some landscaping, tree removal, rock removal, that sort of thing. and basically create a blank slate of a field. You can then go, when you've purchased that piece of field, it's going to have equipment already available for you so that you can decide, all right, based on my design, I think I want a baseball field, and start to construct your baseball field. Once you've done that, you can go play ball. Or, said differently, if you want to repurpose that field for, say, a football game, you can do so. But all of the onus for both the design and the setup is on your shoulders. You have to go do that yourself. Platform as a service is slightly different in that it's a common set of application services that have been designed to meet most business requirements. Or said differently, they're canned and pre-built. So if you know that you're going to be wanting, say, a website, there's a set of pre-built web application services that you can take advantage of and not have to worry about building a server up and trying to install a web server on top of it and host your website. You can literally just go and say, I want a website. Click a button, have it deployed, and load your code up and running. In that same sort of analogy, it's like if you're sitting there on a Saturday morning and say, I want to play baseball, you pull up Google and you go find where's the nearest baseball field, you go show up, you bring your team, the field's already there. It's already been set up with bases, all the line markers have been put down, you just literally show up on the field and play. If you change your mind and decide you want to play a different game or run a different type of application, you got to find a different one. So if you wanted to play football, you're not exactly going to do that on a baseball field. You got to find a football field and change your venue. That's pretty much the same thing with platform as a service. It's take it as it is. You still get to configure it. You still get to modify it, change it, make it fit your needs, but you're not going to change the underlying principle. You know, a baseball field is a baseball field. A website is a website. Software as a service is built on top of both of those two platforms, where it's an offering from a company that provides both the software, infrastructure, hardware, and operations all as one bundled package. So Office 365 is a real good example of that, of where you buy an Office 365 subscription, you show up, it's got SharePoint, it's got Exchange Online, it's got your Active Directory, all of those pieces that you would need to run an office is available to you as software as a service. Now, if you decide, but I don't really want Microsoft Word, I want a different word processing application. Sorry, that isn't something that you can configure in software as a service. It's a take it or leave it type of proposition. If you suddenly decide that you don't want to use Excel, then you really need to take a step back and move away from that product and go find a different thing. Salesforce.com is another good example of a software as a service that you can take advantage of. Putting it back into that analogy, it's like you woke up on that Saturday morning, you decided that you wanted to play baseball, but you didn't have enough friends to field a team. You really didn't feel like walking out of the house because it's raining outside, but you're still really keen on playing baseball. Well, spin up your Xbox and go play the game. You just literally boot it up, you follow the rules that were coded in by the developer, and you play baseball much like you would have if you would have gone and done it real. Now, it's obviously virtualized, but you get the point. It's somebody else's rules, it's somebody else's environment. You don't really get a lot of control to change things, but if you wanted to play baseball, it's purpose-built for you, turnkey solution. Now, the government cloud, everything that I just discussed is available both commercially and for the government. So cloud as a concept covers off on all of those different types of technology. The government cloud is a little bit different than what you hear of when you talk about public cloud providers. The public cloud is really intended for commercial, for companies that are doing e-commerce. The government cloud was designed specifically for the government, for the U.S. government. And when you really take a look at some of the features and functions of it, excuse me for a second. When you take a look at some of the features and functions of how Microsoft built the Azure government, they followed a couple of pretty key tenets when they designed this solution. First and foremost, they worked with the government. They spent time specifically with the federal government and many of the agencies in the federal government to design the government cloud specifically for compliance and security, following the best practices of what the government has been doing for a number of years and applying those same sort of compliances and regulations to the design of the government cloud. It's operated here in the U.S. by U.S. screened persons. So in other words, you're not going to have offshore teams or non-U.S. teams maintaining and operating the cloud on your behalf. It's a fully run, self-contained, sovereign data center here in the United States. Sovereign meaning that the data doesn't leave the borders, the technology doesn't leave the borders. It's intended for within the continental United States and Alaska and Hawaii. It's physically separated which means it's not part of the public cloud backbone. So you can rest assured that the work that you're doing for your state or local government agency is not going to be commingled with that, say, of a retailer that's selling e-commerce products on the open internet. They're physically different, they're not attached to one another, and the backbone behind the Azure Government Cloud is very locked down and secure just for government agencies. But as a customer, you can still take advantage of that instant scalability, that internet compute, and leverage many of the same cloud services that you would have if you were a commercial customer. Microsoft's commitment to you is really focused around that security, privacy, compliance, transparency, and reliability. So it was designed for government usage in government use cases. In terms of its locations, if you look in the United States on a map, you'll see that there's a couple of different types of data centers that exist from Microsoft on the government cloud. They have very specific locations that are dedicated to Office 365. That's your Exchange Online and your SharePoint Online and those types of features, where we're really very much paying attention to that Office 365 type of workload. There's other workloads that are in the orange that are focused on Azure Government. So this would be non-Office 365. This would be everything else. So think your infrastructure as a service, your virtual machines, your application services, website hosting, things like that. These locations were built with the DoD. So they're both regular government regions as well as Department of Defense regions that are available for you to take advantage of. Additionally, because those locations may not necessarily be geographically located close to where you're at, Microsoft also developed a technology called ExpressRoute. And what this is it's partnerships between Microsoft and different internet service providers to drop fiber connections and actual physical circuits into the ISP's backbone so that you as an agency can take advantage of and immediately hop onto the Azure Government Network. So if you were in the Washington area, you could leverage the Seattle ExpressRoute connection and be immediately connected to the Azure Government backbone and transact and operate on that secured network. Also, earlier this spring, Microsoft released 2 additional DoD regions for Azure Government, one in Phoenix, one in San Antonio, as well as ExpressRoute connections into those locations that are happening in the second half of 2017. So should be coming online any day now, in which case then folks can also hop onto those backbones. And if you really take a look at Department of Defense specific requirements, there are some concerns about connectivity and having very dedicated access points for the DoD, and those are located in the Valley, in the DC area, as well as in Dallas. So those are endpoints just for DoD customers. Really makes the commercial cloud and the government cloud different was the focuses of what they were designed to do. So the commercial cloud was focused specifically for public internet services, e-commerce, doing transactions, B2C type of work, companies that were selling things on the internet and needed to do internet scale compute, search engines, things of that nature. The government cloud was focused on private intranet services. So, interagency interoperability, in-state servicing citizens, things that were really dedicated for very specific purposes. The commercial cloud allows for multi-tenancy by many different customers from many different industries. So you can have solutions that are retail and banking operating on the same set of hardware, presumably even in the same data center, maybe even the same rack. Whereas in the government cloud, it's multi-tenant, but it's multi-tenant for customers of government entities only, which means you may have some commingled applications in the same environment between, say, the state of Virginia and the state of Massachusetts, but they're only government. Nobody else can get in there. Data storage in the commercial cloud is controllable, but it can also be sent to other geographies. So a retail customer, say like Procter & Gamble, based out of Cincinnati, Ohio, could put data onto the U.S. commercial cloud, but then replicate that to Europe. Maybe they have some of their sister brands located in Europe, and they want to share data between the two, and they can leverage the Azure backbone to move data between those geographies. For the government cloud, it's a sovereign data cloud, which means it's only here in the U.S. Neither the compute nor the data can transfer outside of this particular region. So if you have a use case where you're trying to transmit data from inside the United States to outside the United States, we'll have to look at a solution in the commercial cloud rather than the government cloud. Security and compliance accreditation in the commercial cloud was focused on individuals and corporate security. meaning privacy, PII data, looking at protecting a person's credit card numbers, making sure that it was handled and transacted in a way that was protecting both the identity of the individual as well as the IP rights of the particular customer or company rather that was transacting on the public internet. In the government, it was specifically designed around a compliance accreditation designed for the government. So think FedRAMP, moderate and high, think DoD, think criminal justice systems. Those types of accreditations and clearance and designs for those types of things from an operations perspective are put into the government cloud. Last but not least, in the commercial cloud, this is where the majority of Microsoft's development starts off. All of the Azure services are available inside of the commercial cloud because that's where they hit the ground first. Most of those services are also available in the government cloud, except for where it doesn't make any sense. So as an example, a content delivery network, which is intended to cache data and share across multiple regions, wouldn't be the type of service that would be readily available in the government cloud because you're really not trying to cache things outside the United States. That's a lot of data about the technology behind it. From a business perspective, why are no two clouds created equal, and why should you be concerned about it? Well, the first is government exclusivity. Not all cloud providers are really designed for government-only usage. In other words, you need to really pay attention to the provider and whether or not they've worked with government, federal, state, local, you name it, to design their cloud, or whether or not it's just commercial and you're just jumping onto that backbone. Why is that important? Well, it's a layer of security to abstract out anything that is non-government traffic. It makes sure that there's a vetting process before you're allowed to use Azure Government. So if you are a company and you think that you want that same sort of level of security, but you're a non-government agency, Microsoft's not going to sell you a subscription. They're not even going to let you onto it. If you're a partner doing development services and you're not specifically servicing a government customer who's verified that you are in fact a partner of record, you too are not going to be able to get onto that government cloud. So there's an extreme vetting process to make sure that it's a dedicated instance just for the government. Broadest compliance. Compliance is key. You want to really make sure that whoever you're partnered with to provide cloud services really does have that level of compliance in place. Otherwise, you could be putting yourself and exposing yourself to risk unnecessarily right from day one. So while there may be a local provider in your state or in your jurisdiction that has a cloud set of technology that they're offering to you as a service, make sure that they have that government compliance and certification in place. Otherwise, you could expose yourselves to criminal justice problems, FBI audits, failures, things of that nature. Hybrid flexibility. This is actually becoming a really key type of concern when we start talking about the early days of moving into the cloud. Not all data is really safe or should be put on the public cloud. A good example of that would be social security numbers, first name, last name, city, state, zip, that personally identifiable information. You as an agency may not be comfortable putting that on the public cloud and you want to keep that on premise. That's your choice. That's your right. You need to make sure that whatever cloud provider you have selected enables you to have that hybrid connection so that you can do both data storage on premise but then leverage that internet scale compute of a cloud provider and be able to have the best of both worlds, and making sure that that design works at runtime and it's part of your journey into the cloud. Last but not least, Level 5 Dod Approved. Again, this kind of goes into that same compliance conversation, but really thinking about specific workloads designed for federal government. You really want to make sure that you've got that level of DoD clearance in your cloud provider. Otherwise, again, you're setting yourself up for failure. Key questions that you should answer as you're starting to think about moving out of traditional hosting technologies and into either private or public cloud. Compliance, again. Does your provider help you meet your compliance needs? Do they have a flexible framework that will enable your innovation? Cloud service providers should provide and prove that they not only understand your complex compliance standards, but that they can help you meet them. You heard me mention a little bit about the criminal justice systems, making sure that your provider would pass an FBI audit. FBI's criminal justice information system standards apply to necessary procedures, security updates, and even employee background checks. You want to make sure that your cloud provider has this in place and that they're abiding by those same stringent regulations. Natural disasters. Given the events of the last couple of weeks, natural disasters and terrorism is keenly on top of everybody's mind these days. Is your data in a hardened data center? Find out where your provider stands with regards to areas such as geo-redundancy, capacity, business continuity. Will your data reside on the U.S. soil, and will it be managed and maintained by U.S. personnel? What happens if the data center that you've chosen as your primary location happens to go offline? A hurricane hits it. Are you going to lose your data? Are you going to be offline while they're waiting for that to recover, or will it immediately come up in a different location? These are things that you should be considering. Some other things that you should also take a look at is don't overlook document retention and e-discovery policies. Meeting and enabling legal compliance means providers should be able to manage and store data in a way that provides retention policies and facilitates discovery, legal holds, archiving, and messaging rules. So if you have a court-ordered request or a government-mandated request for data, can you go find it? Have you fulfilled those obligations? Does your cloud provider still have access to it? Have they destroyed it when they're supposed to? It's one thing to store things forever. It's another thing to also meet those policies of destruction and making sure things have been eliminated at the right time. Find a cloud provider with a record of addressing security. Cybersecurity threats continue to evolve. It's imperative to find a cloud provider who understands the threat landscape and has a proven experience responding to and protecting against them. This is a really unique thing for Microsoft in that not only are they learning from government threats, but also commercial threats. And anytime a threat happens and they've learned from it, they make an adjustment to everyone. The entire platform receives those updates and those fixes so that as these threats continue to evolve, the entire customer base of Microsoft gets to inherit that same level of security and that update as long as you're partnered with them and following their best practices. Migration is a must-have. Open source integration, open source support is key to the success of an agency's cloud strategy. And agencies need the ability to both host and integrate with open source solutions. So don't lock yourself into any one technology. Make sure your cloud provider respects open source as a first-class citizen. You want to make sure that you have a cloud that is one of the most trusted and compliant clouds. So you'll notice on this particular slide, I zeroed in here on the United States government because this was designed for you with you in mind. Really looking at FedRAMP right from day one, making sure that FedRAMP Moderate and High were supported out of the box by Azure. Now, sure, you're still going to be loading your own solutions onto the cloud, and you need to make sure that those solutions also abide by this, that your software hasn't exposed a vulnerability. But if you follow best practices and leverage the guidance and responsibilities that come from Microsoft, you know that you have a solution that is across the board going to abide by DoD standards or follow into the CGIS standards. All of these standards are being followed by and updated on a regular basis by Microsoft. They spend a tremendous amount of time and effort and energy making sure that they stay up to date. They participate in regular audits. They report out on to the respective agencies on a very required basis and make sure that all of those certifications are covered. The other thing is it's not just going to be U.S. government compliant. The Azure Government Cloud is also compliant across all of the certifications, not just the government ones. So you're getting that added benefit of having, say, ISO certification or your SOC 1 and SOC 2 level compliance on this cloud in addition to the government ones. 4 out of 5 government agencies are already using Azure. So if you look across the federal landscape, almost all of the agencies in one way, shape, or form are leveraging some sort of capacity from Azure, whether it's just Office 365 or going all the way full tilt to full infrastructure hosting. And then from a United States perspective, all 50 states have some level of usage of Microsoft Cloud and are taking advantage of it. There's already over 6 million users in the government cloud space. So that's pretty substantial when you think about it, that while maybe your locality or your agency is not currently leveraging Azure, somebody else in your state already is. So speaking of security and compliance, let's kind of deep dive into that a little bit. If we look at the number of compliances, and this slide is already dated, I know that they're above 53 at this point. I think it's closer to 55. But for current information, I should advise you go to Microsoft Trust Center. You can find the current compliance offerings and certifications there. Don't rely on these slides. These slides will be out of date the minute we save this file and publish it. But if you go to the Microsoft Trust Center, you'll be able to find the current information about all of this. But if you look across the spectrum, Microsoft started off with industry and global certifications in mind. So as they designed their data centers, they started off with ISO certifications, making sure they did all the operational things that they needed to comply with most industries, manufacturing and engineering companies. Then they started implementing industry-specific certifications. So obviously federal financial and banking institutions drove and led the way with a lot of this. So if you look across the board, you'll start to see things like FDA for Food and Drug Administration. Those types of things came in as a virtue of trying to satisfy a particular industry. So as a new customer from an industry is interested in using Azure, if they need a particular certification that isn't already applied for, Microsoft will investigate it and see, is this a point solution or is this something other customers can take advantage of, in which case they will adjust their processes to make sure that they fulfill those obligations. You heard me speak very specifically about the U.S. government ones. There's also regional ones. So if you were to look at Germany as an example, Germany has very strict regulations that require data sovereignty for the country of Germany, both commercially and government-wise. So Microsoft answered the call and designed a data center, designed a cloud solution specifically for the country of Germany that doesn't leave their borders. That's an example of how they modified their compliance and their technology to address the needs of that particular state. Or if you flip gears and look at China, everybody knows that China has a very strict policy when it comes to cloud usage, to internet usage. So Microsoft developed the right technology and the right processes to make sure that they were compliant for China and made sure that the cloud was available for China but followed all of those rules and regulations, even to where disconnects were necessary or putting in the right type of firewalling to allow traffic into and out of the country of China to be monitored by the state agencies. So there's a lot of really interesting stuff in here. If you have more curiosity or more information about these compliances, please contact me, contact Microsoft, go to the Trust Center, and you can find out more information. U.S. government compliance, again, is the name of the game. Making sure that the criminal justice information systems and all of those compliances have been fulfilled is something that was very key and top of mind, especially when you consider 26 states really have to follow these. So when Microsoft took this on, they said, all right, that makes sense. Let's do this and make sure it's right. And quite frankly, if you look at it across the spectrum, Microsoft would say that there's 4 times more compliance coverages inside of Azure than there is inside AWS. FedRAMP, as an example, was something that they took very seriously and made sure that they got FedRAMP moderate and high in place since 2015. They also looked at all of their services to see which services were specifically needed to be covered by FedRAMP Moderate and FedRAMP High. So if you look at this chart, and this is just a small sampling of the services that exist inside of Azure, you can see that they went through in a very meticulous way covering each one of these services to make sure that it was abiding by and following FedRAMP standards. Now, point to note, the ones that are in yellow there, those were in process. This slide is obviously a little dated. They were targeted to come online on June 2017, so this summer. And based on my data, those have all either been met or are about to be met for FedRAMP. So again, go to the Trust Center. You'll find all of this data is out there and available for you. The last area that I'll touch on is the Department of Defense. So Microsoft really spent a lot of time making sure they fulfilled their obligations for making the DoD very comfortable with the solutions that existed inside of both Office 365 and the Azure Government Cloud, to the point where earlier in January they achieved that commitment from the DoD. They have all of the credentials and compliance regulations have been kind of set up and agreed to with the DoD. It's a dedicated Azure region and infrastructure with physical isolation just for the DoD, which is a pretty substantial commitment by Microsoft for the United States government. So enough about the security and compliances. What are the costs and what are the values of using the Azure Government Cloud? Well, there's a lot of different values that go beyond just operationally. So most people think when I move into the cloud, I'm trying to operationally reduce my costs for how I run infrastructure. But what are some of the other things that you need to be concerned about when you're taking a look at the cloud? Well, I would say that AKA and Microsoft really think about it in terms of that digital transformation and the way that you deliver services to your agency, to your constituents, and to your employees. You want to really focus on engaging your citizens, empowering your employees, optimizing your operations, and transforming your services. Well, that sounds great. What does that actually mean? Well, if you think about engaging your citizens, it's all about improving the efficiency of the solutions that you've done for them and really trying to make sure that you've engaged those citizens in a way that they want to be engaged. So think trying to do things in social media and social forums, trying to do digital town halls rather than requiring physical presence, making sure that your solutions, your news, your information, the things that are needed by your citizens are available to them in the channels by which they want to be able to gain. Rapid response to their feedback. You know, if I'm walking around the streets of my city and I find a massive pothole, I would like a way for me to be able to snap a picture with my cell phone and send that in and make sure that it's going to get actioned on. Not only do I want to be able to send that in, I want to get responses that you heard me, that you see this, that you put it on your plan to go get that repaired. Empowering your employees means really, making it easier for them to collaborate. Not all agencies are all located within the same building. Some have employees on different sides of the state, and being able to make it so that they feel like they're in a virtual office and can share content, collateral, documentation, or quite frankly, just pick up the phone and call one another, see each other through, cameras, being able to work on a document collaboratively at the exact same time. These are the types of technologies that you want to be able to empower your employees with. Optimizing government operations, sure, everybody wants to reduce costs. That is the name of the game. We want to reduce our maintenance costs. We want to free up our people to be able to do the value-add innovative services, not focus on, care and feeding of that machine and doing operating system loads. Let's move the mundane tasks out and really focus on the innovative ones. Or, improving the agency through agility, making it so that they can be self-sufficient, so that they don't have to rely on third parties or IT departments to go and do new work and do new solutions. So all of those types of things are available in the cloud and available through Azure Government. Last but not least, transforming your services, driving insight. You'll hear the intelligent cloud get spoken about a lot in Microsoft circles. Microsoft doesn't want to just provide you with the next great website hosting platform. They want to provide you with insights about, what is successful about that website? What pages are being used? How is your website performing? Maybe if you made the following changes to this particular database, you can cut half of your hosting costs down because your application will perform better. These types of things are actually running in Microsoft, in Azure right now today, and will help you enable your solutions to operate more effectively, drive more innovation, and deploy faster. The anecdote of the day when on a Monday you came up with a really great idea and by Friday you have it deployed to production, that's real. You can do that with the cloud with this type of technology. Now, whether or not your business processes allow for it, that's a different conversation, but at least the technology is there to empower you. Costs are also a conversation piece that I get into almost on a daily basis. People say, isn't the cloud more expensive? Well, maybe yes, maybe no. On-premise, you need to have two of everything. I don't know of very many solutions where there isn't some degree of high availability or disaster recovery in place in production where I'm really concerned with making sure I've got at least a backup copy of something. That gets expensive. If you're maintaining two of everything in two production-size databases, two production-size servers, you're paying twice the cost for maybe traffic that's not necessary. In the cloud, you don't have to have two of everything. You can if you want to, but you can have two if you wanted and shut one of them off and leave it offline until it's necessary. In other words, in the cloud, it's all on demand. It's all dynamic. So if you start up with one server today and decide tomorrow you need two, go provision one and get it up and running. Or on the flip side, if you're up and running and you realize, man, I'm really way over provision and spending too much money and we don't have that many people coming here, start shutting down instances, reduce your costs immediately. Scaling your solution, on-premise, almost every IT professional will smile when they say, yeah, I had to size that infrastructure with my basic load running at about 30 to 50% of it because I don't know what's going to happen at the end of the month. I may need that extra horsepower and I don't want the server to be the bottleneck. So I've oversized this instance to make sure I can accomplish those peak loads. With the cloud, you size for what you need to operate and you adjust real time. So if that server that you need for 29 out of the 30 days is only a 2-core machine, but on that last day is when you do end of month processing and need a 6-core machine, spin it up right then and there, do it during that time that you need it, and when you're finished with that operation, shut it back down. Infrastructure on premise, you own it. It's yours. You have to maintain it. You do the operating systems. You do the patch management. If there's a network card problem, you have to replace it. If there's a blown set of RAM, you have to replace it. In other words, it's your problem. With the cloud, you get to use the infrastructure, but you don't have to worry about the hardware. So if you've got a workload that's running, say, in Azure, and that machine happens to lose its network card, Microsoft is going to move your workload off of that machine and onto another one and bring it back up. And in some situations, if you followed their policies and followed their procedures, you'll never even know about the outage because they will have taken care of it for you on your behalf. If you didn't follow their procedures, you may have a blip of downtime. There's some of those high availability choices that you have to make when you're designing the solution. Costs on premise, everybody knows it's a capital expense. You have to buy all that hardware right up front, drop it, rack it, and stack it. The adage of it takes 6 to 12 weeks to come up with an idea before it hits the floor is an actual true statement. It's expensive. You got to do it, and it takes time. Then you have to pay for people and energy to get the operating systems and run those machines. In the cloud, you only pay for what you use. You stop paying when you're not using it, and it's all done instantaneously. So if you decide that you need a new server, within a couple of clicks and a couple of buttons, within minutes, you have a new server. And if you've done your work correctly, the hardened image for your operating system was already available and it's already been deployed. Your application code could be instantly dropped on it. Or, said differently, if you no longer need that instance, you can literally shut it down with a couple of clicks and you stop paying for it. So it's more of an operating expense, it's done more of an OpEx model, and it's paid for monthly. Now, to give you just a really gross, simple example, please don't read too much into these numbers. This is trying to just give you some generalized concepts. But if you were to compare on-prem versus infrastructure in the cloud, lifting it from one on-premise to the cloud as is, without doing any transformation, literally just take the workload and move it. If you kind of look at a standard website type of model, a couple of web servers, a couple of database servers, maybe a DR box, that's a pretty substantial upfront investment that usually has a depreciation of 3 or 5 years. If you figure $5,000 per box, you're talking about $875 a month just for hardware. That doesn't take into consideration your software costs, the maintenance costs, both of people, time, and energy, downtime, uptime, that sort of thing. Power and cooling, somebody has to pay for the electricity, somebody has to keep the room nice and cool. So there's a lot of costs when you're talking about on-premise. By just moving to the cloud, the number one thing that you can eliminate right off the get-go is power and cooling. That's Microsoft's problem. That doesn't eliminate software and maintenance because it's still infrastructure. You have to run it. And if you just lift and shifted without doing any transformation, it could potentially be more expensive. Yes, that's right. I'm saying it could be more expensive. And the reason for that is the way you do things on premise is different than the way you do things in the cloud to optimize the workload. So if I were doing a lift and shift in this same exact situation, I would look to transform the environment and say, okay, well, that second tier, that second web server and database server, they were there for high availability, or they were there for just in case, or those DR boxes were there for just in case. I'm going to shut those off. It doesn't mean that they're not available. Should I need them, I can spin them on within seconds, and I'm making sure that they stay in sync with the rest of the solution. But the fact is, they're not running, so I'm not paying for them. So I cut that bill down significantly just by virtue of changing my operational patterns of how I use the cloud and shrink those costs. Or if I'm really interested in doing some transformation, that same website, maybe I could take advantage of platform as a service. Rather than worrying about operating systems and servers and patches and all that kind of stuff, at the end of the day, it's just a website. Why don't I use an app service website, put it in there, take advantage of an Azure SQL database, load everything up. I still have backups, I still have storage, I still have replication, but now my costs have gone down even further because I no longer have to worry about the software, I'm not worrying about maintenance, I'm not worrying about power and cooling, and the solution is going to auto scale and auto heal. Should I get a big burst of traffic? Azure PaaS is just going to size up. Should I have a shrink down in traffic? Azure PaaS is going to shrink down. So there's a lot of different ways that this transformation and moving to the cloud can save you operationally if you're willing to go through a transformation. What are some others doing in Azure and the Azure Government Cloud? Well, Fairfax County in Virginia. Fairfax engaged with AKA in particular to do a CRM project, mainly out of the box functionality, but what they were looking for was a one-stop application development platform to manage citizens, business, public services, tracking interactions, and really sort of looking at, how were they engaging with their citizens. So they replaced an on-premise Siebel solution with some legacy systems and went with an out-of-the-box dynamic CRM Microsoft type of solution. So that's an example of something that we AKA are really good at. Dynamics and CRM is sort of core to what we do. Department of Veteran Affairs. This is another AKA case study. This is a CRM program. It began with pilot applications. We then started rolling it out. We rolled on 20 line of business applications with anticipated of about 10,000 users supporting case management, call centers, scheduling, knowledge management, you name it. So a real good example of how you could take advantage of these tools, do it on-premise or move it into the cloud, but Dynamics and CRM is one of those technologies that works really nicely. Some Microsoft case studies. So state of Indiana. In the state of Indiana, they wanted to provide secure online access to services such as business licensing, tax payments, unemployment benefits. Their solution was to take a look at Azure Active Directory, specifically to B2C, as a system for managing users coming into their Indiana business portal. And the state's providing this as a one-stop shop, one-stop resource for expanding a number of business services all inside of the same platform. The benefits are taking advantage of Microsoft's cloud-based identity management, the real simple solution for handling the scale of the state of Indiana and all of the citizens that exist there. LA County. LA was looking for an innovative way to empower citizens to make improvements in their neighborhoods. Really helping them, empowering them to be observant, look for areas to make things cleaner, to better monitor how the city operated in terms of waste processing, things of that kind of nature. So LA created the MyLA 311 system so that citizens could easily initiate a service request ticket to report cleanup issues. LA used cloud-based technologies, including mobility, mapping, tracking, dashboarding, to streamline service request processes and monitor the field crews and make sure that the progress was actually happening the way that they wanted it to. Citizens can initiate a service request using a web portal, email, a smartphone app, or even a phone call to report any number of things from potholes, illegal dumping, broken trash bins, graffiti, you name it. And basically the city will has always taken care of these problems, but now uses the technology to give the citizens a number of quick, convenient ways to request that service and also follow up on and track to see, did it happen? Did it get done? Montgomery County, Pennsylvania. They were basically, struggling with an aging messaging infrastructure, and they wanted to develop a more stable email environment for archiving and reliable data security, reduce their infrastructure, that sort of thing. So they looked at Office 365. For a streamlined way of managing emails and messages and documents. And the benefit really came down to a collaborative solution in the cloud. They enhanced their ability to quickly respond to requests and deliver services to their constituents. They avoided up to $1 million worth of new infrastructure by taking advantage of Office 365 as a SaaS product and not have to worry about infrastructure anymore. State of Hawaii. Real interesting thing about state of Hawaii was, if you think about it, they're multiple islands. They're physically separated and dispersed by water. So how do these agencies inside of the state actually, communicate and collaborate when they don't physically even exist on the same island? So they turned to Microsoft and turned to Microsoft Exchange Online and Azure Active Directory to be the platform to help with their collaboration, to be able to handle SharePoint and SharePoint point online for sharing of documents and doing that real-time collaboration on documents, being able to allow people on different islands to speak and interact with Skype Business Online for instant messaging, or even do real-time communication. Some of those benefits are, they can collaborate with their colleagues and track that information even on their mobile devices while they're, transporting or moving between the islands. Last case study that I'll mention here is Grand Rapids, Michigan. So they were developing their own billing and customer service processes. Citizens would go to ask their questions through a main switchboard and then be transferred to the appropriate department. But because there was no standardized ways for the departments to share information, sometimes the callers were forced to repeat the process many times because they would end up in the wrong spot, or the question that they answered in one department would get asked again by another department and the information wouldn't flow through. So just imagine, you're calling a call center, that would get kind of frustrating pretty fast. So in essence, they used Microsoft CRM and designed that product from Dynamics to implement new processes and put them to good use. So it's an exciting and an efficient way for a person to come in, answer questions once on one phone call with one staff person, get routed to the right location, get quick responses, quick knowledge and answers to any of the questions, and potentially not even have to land at a person to get their answers, because the system could actually speak back to them and say, here's what you're looking for. So a lot of information, a lot of really interesting use cases for Azure Government Cloud, a lot of ways that you can transform the way that you're serving your citizens and your employees. Azure Government Cloud is something you should absolutely take a look at. Should you have additional questions or concerns or comments, you can always reach out to me or Microsoft, and we'd be happy to help you with your journey to the cloud. So with that, I'll open it up to any questions or answers that I can provide for anybody on the line.
Great. Thank you so much, Greg. We do still have a couple of minutes left, ladies and gentlemen, so if you can please submit any questions you have using the questions pane in the attendee control panel there on your right-hand side of your screen. We do have a couple that came through, Greg, if you're ready.
Sure. Fire away.
Great. We have, if Azure Government has so many security compliances, then why are there still so many agencies that are afraid of the cloud from a security standpoint?
That's a great question. And it's one that you face both in government as well as in the commercial space. Compliance, it means a lot to CIOs, CTOs, CXOs, if you will, that you're fulfilling and following the obligations that are required of your particular agency, but that doesn't necessarily give you the warm and fuzzies that everything is nice and safe and secure. Said slightly differently, applications still need to be designed the right way. Just because you're running it on-premise doesn't mean you're secure. Look at companies like Equifax, unfortunately, that have had breaches and have had denial of service attacks while they were still operating in a traditional way. When you operate things on-premise or you operate on the cloud, that still doesn't take away the need to design your applications in a way that is very secure, that are very robust, that handle encryption, that handle denial of service attacks. The cloud isn't going to magically make that go away for you. Sure, there's a lot of investment by Microsoft to provide tools and solutions to help minimize those risks, but applications still need to be designed in a secure way. I think the other reason folks get kind of nervous is, when that server is in your server room or under your desk, you can touch it, you can see it, you can feel comfortable that it's there, and if something goes wrong, I can walk up to it and fix the problem. Whereas when it runs in the cloud, you don't have access to the physical machines, and it makes people instinctively nervous. I think what you'll find is, over time, the investment that companies like Microsoft are making in their cloud are so much more substantially large than what you can do on your own, that you'll end up with an even more secure solution by taking advantage of one of these clouds like Azure Government, because you get the breadth and the depth of every customer involved that are taking advantage of that, notifying Microsoft of the problem and Microsoft correcting it. Whereas if you do it on your own, in your own data center, you are on your own. So, good question.
Okay, thank you, Greg. I see that the last slide in your cost section said that the transformation could make the website that much cheaper. But what were the project costs to make that happen?
All right, so again, I put those costs up there to give you an illustrative example of how you could potentially do things and what costs could look like, from the worst case scenario of being more expensive to the best case scenario of being substantially cheaper. If I talk about websites in particular, websites are something that we've been doing now since mid-90s. I think the technology behind websites has really gotten fairly streamlined, where there's pretty much very set use cases and patterns across the board in terms of technology, whether it's Java, PHP, .NET, or other. With websites in particular, moving those to platform as a service is almost always that easy, with very little project cost involved to make a transformation. So if you've got hard-coded URLs in your website, yeah, I can't fix that for you, and there's a project there that we have to go into your code to make some adjustments. But if you followed normal best development practices for your website, moving that to a platform as a service product is actually almost fairly easy, fairly cheap. Very reduced prices in terms of transformation costs. I've seen many websites just go as is without needing a developer to get involved at all. Now, if you're talking about a website built on a proprietary piece of technology that has licensing associated to it, you have to look at whether or not that license is portable, whether or not that third party supports cloud technology, and whether or not that license is allowed to be moved. You may run into a situation where it's just not legally compliant. That license isn't portable, and you have to look at either working with the vendor to get a license that is, or worst comes to worst, transform that website so it's no longer dependent upon that technology. But those cases are really rare these days. It depends on the workload, depends on the type of application, but in that particular example, the project costs were negligible, if almost non-existent.
Interesting. All right. Thank you. Just as a reminder, ladies and gentlemen, you can submit your questions in the control panel on the right-hand side of your screen. You have, looks like, just one last one in the queue right now. Is there a major, you actually covered this a little bit, but is there a major cost difference between government and commercial cloud?
All right, that's a great question. Everybody always wants to know about pricing. So I have to give the disclaimer, I'm not a Microsoft employee, so I can't give you Microsoft answers to the pricing question. So should you really want to get into the weeds of that, we would have to involve Microsoft, or you'd have to engage in an Azure purchase with us or with Microsoft. But generically speaking, all cloud services are really dependent upon what that service is and where the location is that's providing that service. So even in the commercial cloud, I'll use the commercial cloud for a second. If you were to deploy that same website that we were talking about in the previous example in East US versus West US, there's a slight price difference between those two locations. Some of it is governmental and tax related. Doing something in California is going to be a different price point than, say, Virginia. Some of it's heating, power, AC, cooling, utility based. Some of it is age of the data center, age of the technology, but there is some price differences depending upon the region you deploy your services. Now, they're not significant. We're not talking like double. Usually it's under 10% of a price difference. So it's usually fairly negligible. I think the last time I checked, the price for a website in the East US versus the West US only differed by $1 per month. It was something really, really small. But it does vary depending upon the region. Now, government versus commercial, is there a major price difference? Not really. It's the same sort of thing where, yeah, you're paying a little bit different pricing because of the compliances that are in place, but you're not paying a penalty because it's a government cloud. Now, a lot of that depends on your enterprise agreement with Microsoft, should you have engaged with one, or with your service provider like AKA if you bought Azure from us, making sure that we've engaged in a negotiation to make sure those prices are kept simply. But generically speaking, no, there really isn't a significant price difference between government cloud and commercial cloud. It's really more about what location, what geography, what service you're using, and whether or not you scaled appropriately. Good question, though. Really good question.
Great. Thank you. Great. Looks like that is all the questions we have, and we're just about out of time here. So just thank you again, Greg, so much for taking us through that. And thank you, everyone on the line, for joining us today for the webinar titled "The Cloud is Here, Why Aren't You?" You will be receiving a follow-up email with a link to the recording of today's webinar in the next few business days. If you have any other questions, please contact Greg directly at ginks@akaes.com. It should be right there on the screen. And on behalf of AKA, thank you again for joining us, and just enjoy the rest of your day and have a great weekend.
Absolutely. Thank you, everybody. Really appreciated the time and the opportunity to speak with you.